He explains that the border town is offering shelter from the storm, along with food that will fill their stomachs and numerous job opportunities. He promises solid homes without a single crack and beds warmed by furnaces, as comfortable as sun-soaked meadows. He reassures them that by closing their windows, they won't feel the cold, even in thin clothes. He paints a vivid picture of their meals, porridge sprinkled with jerky, where each grain is visible in every spoonful, with one bowl enough to satisfy a person's hunger. Everyone is genuinely touched by his motivating pitch. They can't help but think how they had expected the prince to talk about citizenship and legalities, but instead, he's describing their benefits. The prince then adds that he longs for the day when every citizen won't have to worry about clothing, food, or shelter. However, their enemies crave the opposite, and these monsters were clearly sent by them. He reveals that their enemies want everyone dead, including him. He promises to increase security and ensure that no foes are hiding among the refugees for everyone's safety. As he finishes speaking, the crowd begins to cheer and praise the prince for everything he said and the care he is showing. Redhead manages to get back on his feet and can't help but point out how the prince completely stifled every trace of panic with just a few words. That's when Carter approaches him, giving him props for his keen eyes since he was the one who spotted the shady guy first. Later, Redhead is called to the prince's office, where the prince addresses him as Mr. Wade. Finally, now that we know his name, we don't have to call him Redhead anymore. The prince commends him for his astute observations and wonders if he was really just a normal citizen in the past. Wade reveals that he used to be part of the patrol in Golden Wheat City for about 6 years until the city was invaded by pirates. The prince then points out that his profile shows nothing special, and according to Carter's report, he should currently be living in temporary shelters. Prince finally catches on that Wade basically hid his true talents during registration, and he asks him why he did that. Redhead explains that the reason he's alive in Border Town is because of a former prisoner he met in Golden Wheat City named Kriegsman. That old guy saved him when times were dire. Since the old man is labeled a criminal, he can't be registered as a citizen, but he can't just leave his old friend behind in the Western District, especially since his friend is getting old and can't take care of himself. The prince asks if the reason Wade wanted to become a police officer was so he could work and protect his friend at the same time. Wade stutters before responding, but the prince tells him to cool it, as there is no crime thinking about anything. He then asks if Wade has any family. Redhead lowers his gaze and explains that his family died in Golden Wheat City. Roland then asks about Kriegsman. Redhead explains that he's all alone because the rat scapegoated him, which led to his imprisonment. The prince reminds him that anyone with specialized skills can rent a place in the city and enjoy the benefits of citizenship, including their families. He asks him if he understands what this means. Of course, the redhead quickly catches on to what Prince is trying to imply, so he starts jumping for joy when he realizes he can bring Kriegsman along. The prince tells him to bring his old friend to registration, and they'll take care of everything. Wade is so happy to hear this news that he literally starts slamming his head on the ground, bowing up and down frantically. Then the prince gets serious, warning him not to let his happiness cloud his judgment. He emphasizes that he should remain cautious, just like he was today. If he doesn't pass the subsequent tests, he'll still have to live in temporary shelters. Of course, Wade quickly agrees. Speaking of tests, Wade then remembers that there were a lot of questions on the written test that he didn't know how to answer, so he just wrote whatever came to mind. So he curiously asks why he got elected for the police unit. The prince smirks and says there was no right or wrong answer. Every answer depended on the person taking the test. It wasn't about getting things right, but more of a literacy test. As long as Wade could understand the question and write a legitimate answer, he passed. A little later, Knight Carter steps forward to remind the prince that they've received intel on the assassins. The prince tells him to go ahead and speak, and Carter explains that Barov has an apprentice named Salon, who was in charge of gathering refugees in the north. Since they ran out of boats on the way back, Salon contacted some of his friends at the capital to see if any merchant ships heading to the western region were available for rent. That's how the operation got leaked. The refugees stayed in Silver City, which is only half a day's distance from the capital, making it easy for Timothy to make arrangements. He further explains that while Timothy might not be sending armies from the capital, that doesn't mean he isn't trying to get revenge. Prince then reflects on the situation and feels somewhat relieved that the assassins only had pills and not explosives. If those guys had exploded in the middle of the crowd, all of their new workers collected over the past 2 months would have died. He highlights that, considering Salon's mistake came from inexperience, they'll keep the punishment light and cut 2 months' worth of his salary. This is the only way to make him aware of his grave mistake. He also tells Carter to keep a close eye on screening the refugees and to have Sylvie and Nightingale assist his team. They must ensure that no scouts or assassins escape and protect the lives of the refugees. Right at that moment, Lady Leaf bursts into the office, happily announcing that the balloon is back. Finally, the moment we've all been waiting for has arrived, and the balloon is here. We're about to hear all the juicy details about that mysterious witch." As soon as the balloon lands, Anna jumps out of the basket and immediately hugs the prince. He embraces her warmly, while the other two little girls also jump at the prince and surround him. His sister could not help but to notice how well his brother gets along with every single witch. The prince playfully asks if she wants a hug from her brother too. Tilly just smirks and says she'll pass, reminding him that the last time he tried to hug her, he threw her down on the ground. Finally, Ash steps out of the basket, holding the witch in her hand. As for the prince's first impression, he's just amazed, because the witch's outfit doesn't look cheap at all, and she looks like some rare character out of a gacha game. They fill him in that the witch is fine, but her magic is recovering at a very slow pace, so it'll take 3 or more days for her to get back to normal. The prince decides to call her the Slumberer for now. He announces that he'll open a room on the castle's 3rd floor for her, and the rest of them need to come to the lobby because he wants to hear all the details about what happened. Once they're in the office, Tilly explains everything in detail, and once she is done explaining everything, he admits to himself that he would be unsure of what to do in such a situation. He's impressed by Tilly's decisiveness in selecting the witches to form a perfect team. He then asks his sister if she believes that the massive worm might be related to devils. She responds that it's certainly not impossible since it had a completely different appearance, and it might have been another type of demon. This could mean they can compare devils to humans, while demons as hunting dogs. She believes some of these monsters follow the devil's commands and help them complete tasks. The prince kind of agrees with her assumption, but he's still not entirely sure. You see, if the devils are unable to dominate the continent because of the limits imposed by the red mist, then why don't they just harass the 4 kingdoms with demons year-round? Why do they always wait until winter? He also notes that the wolf-lion hybrids from last year were clearly more intelligent than the other demons. If intelligence can be gained through age, it will be just impossible for the devils to tame the other race. Tilly then adds that the enemies Nightingale encountered outside of the hole are more concerning because a demon that can conceal itself in daylight and move silently can breach any defenses. Their limited knowledge about demons makes this problematic, and they don't know how to deal with enemies like that at all. The prince agrees, and points out that if Nightingale hadn't witnessed it, he wouldn't be willing to believe in its existence. However, it seems these demons have never appeared in the western region before. Otherwise, a few of them would have reduced Longsong Fortress to ashes long ago. Tilly then mentions that the longer the months go on, the stronger the demons become, and this is a historically proven fact. She points out that it started snowing during autumn this year, which means their enemies will be extremely strong. The prince finds himself startled when he realizes that Tilly is actually considering his enemies as her own. This thought puts a smile on his face. He decides to assign Nightingale to watch the perimeter, and as long as Sylvie stays in the castle, she can keep an eye on the whole wall and alert the other witches as soon as she detects anything suspicious. Later, we see the prince and Lady Scroll walking down the corridor. Lady Scroll expresses concern about the new witch, and points out that until they confirm the identity of this new mysterious witch, they can't guarantee she isn't an enemy. The prince agrees, saying he knows, which is why he's temporarily placed a stone of divine judgment on her. Once they enter the room, they see Anna already inside. When the prince asks about the new witch, the girl explains that Nana and Lily both tried using their powers on her, but nothing worked, so all they can do now is wait. Even though she has been sealed for so long, there isn't a single scratch on her body, which is just incredible. She suspects it's probably similar to herself being impervious to fire, and this new witch's ability might be linked to ice. Roland then gives his most favorite girl a sweet pat on the head, commending her efforts for cutting open the coffin. Anna responds that it wasn't just her. She explains that this witch was very clever in how she encased herself, and must be quite powerful. She reveals that the witch first froze all her internal bodily cycles with extremely cold ice, then used normal ice to seal the cold ice inside her so it wouldn't melt easily. When she cut open the outer layer, the coffin broke instantly, which makes Anna believe that the new witch must have placed certain cracks there on purpose. She can tell that this lady had been waiting for this day, and she's sure that she will definitely wake up. The scene then transitions into the witch's memories, where we see a knight desperately trying to convince her that the wall has been breached and the allied armies can't hold on for much longer, so they have to go. But the lady just tells him to let go of her, insisting that she can fight as well. That's when a giant monster appears, stomping on every human in sight. It's so huge that there are literally 3 devils riding its back, and other devils are wreaking havoc on the ground. Even with all the chaos around her, the icy witch remains stubborn. While the man continues trying to convince her to leave, the witch makes it clear that as a member of the Holy City's witches, her death will also be on the battlefield. But her expression drops when she spots something unexpected in the sky. It turns out to be another witch crashing down with her heavy sword, and she's apparently the divine warrior of the Alliance, the extraordinary Transcendent. This lady has fire in her soul, and as soon as she lands, she literally blows away a bunch of devils like they're just trash bags. Her landing is so badass that it obliterates the ground beneath her from the force. She then tells everyone to go, claiming that she will be fine and urges them to leave while they still have the chance. The soldiers argue that they have nothing left to fight for since this is the last holy city, and yet they haven't been able to stop the devils. The Icy Witch finally begins to tear up, realizing they've actually lost tens of thousands of people and soldiers. They've played every card up their sleeve, but they're still on the losing side. But this badass lady states they shouldn't give up. There's still hope. She raises her sword, trying to lift everyone's spirits, and orders them to cross the mountains and rivers to the wastelands. She tells them they can rebuild order, and their survival will lead to victory. All of the citizens begin to retreat, but the Icy Witch still has doubts about whether they can actually rebuild order. She feels hopeless, and the reason for her hopelessness is because even their most prosperous holy city, built on the most fertile lands, has fallen like a child's sandcastle in a flash, leaving panic and chaos enveloping everyone. She wonders if escaping is really enough to avoid the devils. But then Alice's words start to reverberate in her mind, and she begins to believe that as long as they survive, they will eventually reach victory one day. I think that lady with the giant sword must have been Alice. Regardless, she believes that the magic stones and documents she has stored in the Misty Ferret research facility will be crucial for their task. That's why she grits her teeth for now and presses forward, because passing this knowledge to the next generation is the only hope for humanity's survival. She also reveals that there's a popular belief in the holy city that witches are chosen by the gods, while mortals who can't wield magic are merely their stepping stones. However, the mortals, whose shields are filled with courage and tenacity, possess certain qualities that the witches lack. With the mortal soldiers sacrificing themselves, she is now even more determined not to die here. She knows she must ensure the safety of the data and findings. She crosses the mountains and rivers while the devils continue chasing her. When she finally reaches the Misty Forest Research Lab, she finds the same magic stone. She grabs it and decides to pass along the message. But just at that moment, the devils break into the room. One of them throws a spear with godly speed, but she quickly uses her icy powers to shield herself inside an ice barrier. Alone inside the ice, she isn't sure if she's dead or alive. Suddenly, a bright light begins to shimmer, and the veil of darkness lifts as she opens her eyes in the real world. Wendy and Anna perk up when they see this and shout to the Highness that the lady is awake. The Icy Witch hears this and wonders why they are using such an outdated ancient title to address someone. It seems like this lady might actually be from a more advanced era, but who knows? We will have to wait to find out. They quickly gather around her, and the prince asks how she feels. But the first question the lady asks is where she is. The prince reveals that she's in Border Town in the western region of the Grey Castle Kingdom, and that he is the fourth prince of Grey Castle, Roland Wimbledon. He introduces all the ladies as members of the Witch Association and then asks her if she remembers anything. The lady feels completely overwhelmed hearing all of this. It's the last thing she expected. Unknown locations, unknown time periods, and unfamiliar people. She has no idea what this Witch Association is, but she's at least relieved that she is among witches, who are her own kind. She's also confused by this title of prince, and thinks to herself that it's something from the First Divine War, from ages ago. Her mind spins as she realizes that she might have returned to a time before the war. She wonders if the gods have given her a second chance to prepare and save the holy city, but that thought feels utterly ridiculous. Anna can tell that this lady's mind is going haywire with thoughts, and the prince agrees. But just then, the Icy Witch abruptly sits up and bombards them with questions. She asks if they saved her, if the devils are gone, whether they won the war, and what happened to Tequila City. The prince takes a moment to gather his nerves after getting startled by her abrupt questions, and then promptly tells her that he found her in the basement of a stone tower. The Icy Witch then quickly flings Wendy's hand away, while our girl was just merely trying to assure her. She looks arrogant and thinks to herself that she usually doesn't care about status, but she feels quite patronized to be interrogated by someone of a lower class. If they were talking to Alice this casually, there would be severe consequences for such behavior. She pushes her arrogance aside and finally introduces herself as Agatha, a witch from the Tequila Research Guild. She then points out that since it's been 450 years, could it be that humans have been fighting devils for that long? Prince explains that she has been asleep for a very long time, so things might be different from what she remembers. If she feels fine, they can explain everything to her slowly. Agatha says she's willing to listen. With that, Prince explains everything to her and reminds her once again that they are currently in Border Town, which is in the western region of Grey Castle, one of the 4 great kingdoms. The witch finds this absurd and claims that the 4 kingdoms he speaks of are nothing but wasteland and have no value for development. She adds that the concept of kings and elites is an archaic construct that disappeared with the First Divine War. She finds it ridiculous that witches are being hunted by mortals, and asks who would dare do such a thing. She then quickly tries to use her magic powers, but nothing happens. Pulling the sheets over, she notices a divine stone of judgment resting on her feet and starts freaking out to see this, calling everyone crazy here. She then calls out to the other witches, questioning why they are helping a mortal defend against a high-tier transcendent. She reminds them that using any of these stones is highly illegal according to the law of the Alliance. Prince facepalms himself because he already had expected it to happen, but Wendy reassures him that she'll handle it. She steps closer to the newcomer, introduces herself as Wendy, and tells her that things are not as she claims, and what Prince mentioned is actually true. Wendy admits that she doesn't know much about her life in Tequila City all those centuries ago, but she tells Agatha that today, Tequila doesn't exist anymore, and the alliance she mentioned is gone too. She explains that she and the other witches have been living in hiding until they met Prince Roland, who provided them with a stable shelter and encouraged them to use their powers to help make the world a better place. Wendy then narrates how this world is prejudiced against witches, with divine judgment stones everywhere. In this society, witches are treated like nothing more than mortals. Agatha then also tells her side of the story, revealing that the Alliance was a large organization created by the leaders of multiple witch kingdoms. It consisted of many high-tier witches and transcendent beings. To win the divine war, they built massive armies, ruled numerous holy cities, and nurtured new witches, settling conflicts and maintaining peace and order. She's baffled by how such a powerful group could just disappear without a trace. She wonders what happened to Master Alice and the survivors who were supposed to rebuild. She desperately wants to know where they are now. Right at that moment, Wendy brings over a cup of tea, and surprisingly, Agatha takes it without making a fuss. In reality, she's hoping to get the Divine Judgment Stone off her, and gaining the trust of the others seems like the only way to do it. But as far as they've told her, she wants to see the truth for herself before believing any of it. Agatha then explains again that she's from the Tequila Research Guild, and that in the 5th year of the Divine War, Tequila was the last holy city to fall. Many people escaped, but she returned to the Misty Forest to collect some things she had left behind. Prince asks if she actually fought the devils, to which she agrees, and she looks a bit annoyed, reminding them who else was supposed to fight them since mortals can't do squat against them. Prince quickly asks if she's a witch from the church, but Agatha says she's never heard of this church he speaks of. She mentions that all the holy cities were built by witches, and that their citizens included both witches and mortals. Mortals handled childcare and reproduction, and when a child awakened their powers, they were sent to specific organizations for training. Of course, combat witches would join the alliance to fight off the devils. Lady Scroll then finally brings up the book Lady Kara had, and she asks her if she can read this. As soon as Agatha takes a look, she confirms that this is a witch's diary. Wendy asks about the mysterious language, and Agatha explains that it was created to be separate from mortal language, so they couldn't participate in higher-level matters. She states that these writings require magic to read, so she can teach any witch how to read it. That's when Prince, with his endless wisdom, chimes in. He points out that writing is meant to be a tool for communication, and its usefulness lies in its accessibility. He says it's quite foolish to exclude mortals from her inner circle because, in reality, mortals can take on many different jobs and positions with the right education and training. They're not inferior, even if they don't have magic. Agatha reflects that while she doesn't mind working with mortals, she dislikes it when they act like they're in charge. Even her family's head servant was more polite than this prince. Then, Sister Scroll asks her if she's heard the name Alice. The mention of that name startles Agatha, and she asks where they heard it, and further asks if knowledge from 450 years ago is still around. Sister Scroll explains that they found this book in the Eastern Forest, and Alice's name was written on the last page in mortal language. Agatha then explains that Alice is the Queen of Comet City, one of the 3 leaders of the Alliance. She's an extraordinarily transcendent being, meaning she's even above the transcendent level, and she's the strongest witch in the Alliance. Agatha isn't surprised that no one here knows about these transcendent witches, especially since this knowledge has been lost over time. She explains that there's really no limit to a witch's powers. With enough time, practice, and experience, very few witches are lucky enough to evolve their abilities into something incredible. This is called a superior awakening, and there's no cap on it. The growth is not always concrete or predictable. Speaking of awakening, Prince recalls that they have 4 witches who have achieved it. This shocks Agatha, as it's something unbelievable, and she asks how many witches the Union have in total. Wendy responds that there are only 10, and this revelation further boggles Agatha even more. It sounds utterly ridiculous to her that 4 out of 10 witches have awakened. She then tries to explain that witches who evolve their powers are no joke. They're the ones chosen by the gods and things like that. That's when Prince hints for Anna to step forward. As she does, ready to demonstrate her abilities, Agatha can't help but think that Anna looks pretty young and shouldn't have enough experience or knowledge to be an awakened witch. At first, Anna displays her firepower, and Agatha confirms that it's a flame ability, which is pretty common. However, Prince tells her there's more to it since this is just the ability Anna started with. Then, Anna shows the second stage of her abilities by solidifying her flames. As she forms a cube out of the fire, Agatha is officially blown away. Meanwhile, Prince casually asks her if this can count as a higher tier awakening. Agatha reflects on how the Holy City is gone and the Alliance is destroyed. Witch powers should be declining as a result of zero training and guidance, so a young witch's awakening twice isn't something that can be explained by luck. She also feels kind of jealous and awe, remembering that she ascended at 26 and was considered a prodigy. Hearing this guy say he has 3 others like Anna makes her feel out of the loop. She can't help but think about how lucky he is. It's like he's the gotcha god with so many SSR witches. It's just unbelievable. Eventually, she gives in and agrees that Anna's abilities do count. She also recognizes Prince's status as Highness and asks at what age Anna awakened. Prince is a bit startled for a moment that she's addressing him by his title, but then he starts patting his favorite girl and says that Anna's first awakening happened when she used her magic to defend against demons, and the second was a result of her education. Of course, Agatha is bewildered and asks what kind of education he's talking about. Prince gets all chummy and excited, saying they'll talk about that later. But first, he asks her what Alice's divine punishment trials were. She then explains that Alice was extremely powerful. Once she wore a stone of divine punishment, no criminal could rival her abilities. However, the number of extraordinary transcendent beings was too small, so they lost out on a variety of witch powers. According to the Alliance data, there was always one combat-oriented witch after every 10 witches, and the same ratio applied to transcendent witches as well. Among those low numbers of combat witches, there wasn't any telling how many could ascend. The Alliance even had a 50-year period when not a single witch ascended, which made their combat power pretty inconsistent. Prince quickly catches on that not all mortals could become witches. Not all witches were fighters, and even among combat witches, not all were strong. Agatha agrees, revealing that while the Alliance created a military of mortals, even armed with stones of divine punishment, they were no match for the terrifying devils. In these desperate times, Alice ordered the entire scholarly guild to research how to push human warriors to their absolute limits. Agatha believes that Alice succeeded in something significant after her experiments, and she left all those messy notes in this diary. When Prince asks if she wasn't part of the guild during that time, Agatha explains that she left after Alice gave that order. Instead, she built her own research facility in the Misty Forest. Alice quickly found the right direction, using stones of divine punishment to combine the powers of both mortals and witches. However, this process required the sacrifice of witches' lives, something Agatha could never accept. She believed that Alice should have focused more on unlocking the stone's properties, rather than treating witches as expendable resources in a desperate bid for power. Both Prince and Tilly are shocked to hear about this sacrifice thing. Agatha mentions that Alice had no choice but to stoop that low since tequila was at stake. However, with the Alliance gone, it's likely that this method didn't survive and probably won't appear in the future. That's when Prince reveals that the Divine Punishment Army still exists. This revelation comes as a great shock to her, while Prince further explains that the church she's never heard of is the organization that built 2 holy cities in the mountains. They were the ones who started hunting witches. They even adopt orphans and children in poverty to raise in their nunneries. Wendy escaped from one of those places. The church has its own army and territory, and most of their most powerful warriors are part of the Divine Punishment Army. These senseless monsters possess immense strength that rivals transcendent witches, and their numbers are always growing. It wouldn't be a stretch to think that the church also has a division of powerful witches. This is the only reason, he explains, that they had to put the Stone of Divine Judgment on her, because they can't be sure if she works for the church. He explains that if it were not for her clarification, they thought the church had built the city of Tequila in the wastelands, and that the ruins belonged to them too. Agatha, on the other hand, is shocked that some mortal faction stole Alice's secrets and is now hunting witches to create a divine punishment army for their own dominance. Wendy then tells her to stop worrying and suggests she take a good night's sleep. Hopefully they'll find the truth slowly. After that, they decide to leave. But before going, Prince tells Agatha she was wrong about one thing, which is that mortals can slay devils too. And when he says this, he means every word of it. Later that night, while Prince is working, he asks Nightingale how Agatha is doing. Our snack-addicted girl replies that Agatha is asleep and had a bowl of porridge earlier, so her appetite is fine. Sylvie is also keeping watch over her. He then tells her he's already taken the stone off Agatha and tells her to figure out the truth of Agatha's claims when she wakes up tomorrow. She asks if he actually believes her, and he replies that he thinks most of what she said is true. Agatha uses the same writing and language as people today, so even though there's a mountain range from where she is, It suggests these two regions used to be closely connected. He's not sure what went down 400 years ago, but he points out that most of the cities were built around 200 to 300 years ago, and that's when strongholds started popping up. He's always been curious about how astrologers and alchemists knew so much without any records of their experiments. Now, it clicks for him that the survivors of the Alliance probably escaped to this region, bringing their language and civilization with them. They must have helped these folks build their governments, fortresses, and cities along the way. Nightingale asks why he's so confident about this. She jokes that if he's wrong, he'll owe her a deluxe lunch tomorrow. Prince playfully counters as well, asking what happens if she's wrong. She smirks in response, and says she'll give him whatever he wants. He then gets back to his studies, noting that he still has a lot to organize since Agatha's information is so vast. Nightingale points out that Agatha is arrogant, and doesn't really like him, which Prince can totally see. After all, Agatha lived in a world where witches were way above mortals, so in her eyes, he probably looks like just some weeds by the roadside. She then asks him if he doesn't hate her, and he shakes his head, saying no. He explains that she's just a victim who was abandoned by time. Imagine sleeping in an ice coffin for 400 years and waking up to find the world completely different. That kind of unfamiliar fear would raise anyone's defenses. He's sure that once she comes to terms with reality, she'll change her beliefs too. Nightingale acknowledges this and claims that she already knew he was going to say something like that, but she reassures him that she won't let Agatha insult him in any way. Well, that's a wrap for this video. Let me know what you think. Do you prefer me to keep narrating the story in detail, or should I just start skimming through the stuff to catch up faster? Let me know in the comments below.